most or all of you already know Candace, but I'm just going to boast about her anyway. So Candace is not only a writer, she's an educator, administrator, and public policy advocate in violence prevention and women's health. She has served as executive director of HAWK, a domestic violence agency in Salem, director of women's health at Addison Gilbert Hospital and at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health in Boston, and she currently co-facilitates PFLAG support groups for parents in the greater Boston area. I came to know Candace and Henry and Annie and the Gloucester Center by way of grant writing. I moved to Cape Ann almost 4 years ago to start a practice in creative writing for social work. My true love is creative writing and teaching, but I'm also a grant writer, and I sent letters to local nonprofits introducing myself. So this is how I met Henry and Annie and got to know the Gloucester Writers Center. We wrote grants together, and as I learned their vision and mission, I came to admire what they're doing on behalf of writers and the community. Grant writing is also how I met Candace. She was the executive director of HAWK at the time. From our first meeting at the Pleasant Street Tea Company, it was very evident we would not be doing any grant writing together. Candace told me about this extraordinary project that she was working on, a book that would be called My Daughter, He. I was impressed with her focus and commitment to telling the story of her experience as the parent of a daughter who became her son. I had the privilege of witnessing her bring compassion and understanding to a topic our culture is only now beginning to invite into the map of our thinking. Candace is a gifted communicator, capable of being generous to her reader in ways that most of us resist. One of the biggest challenges for a writer is to bring to the page our most vulnerable moments and to write them with clarity, grace, and insight. And Candace did all that and a lot more. In My Daughter, He, Candace takes us on the journey as she lets go of her beloved daughter in order to welcome her beloved son. My Daughter, He was selected for review by Publishers Weekly, which is a really, really big deal. Yay! And I'm not at all surprised. Working with Candace was a reminder every day of why I love what I do. She's an advocate at heart, and her writing illuminates the person in important ways that can change the world one reader at a time. Yay, Candace. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ellen. Well, as anyone who's ever tried to write anything, you all know how hard it is to come together with an idea. And I have to say that Ellen was probably one of my first cheerleaders in helping me believe that, in fact, this could become, a book of some help to other people. So it went from being a journal, actually, because when my child first was gender nonconforming, I went to my journal to write and try to understand what was happening. And actually, I can't say that I'm an avowed journal writer. I only write when my life is falling apart. So, people that go back and look at their journals and muse and set goals for their life, I can't do that because my journals are always horrible moments in my life, and once it's written, I never want to look at it again. But I did a lot of writing as I was mothering, and so I'm going to just briefly give you a little bit of an overview, and then I'm going to read some excerpts from the book. But I want to say, first of all, that I chose today as the day that I wanted to launch my book in this community, because today is Transgender Day of Remembrance. And it's a day when we remember those who have been killed because of our society's intolerance toward people who are different. And I want today to be a day that we transition to be, instead of one day of remembrance, that we create every day of acceptance. And parents really are fundamental in that process. The National Transgender Discrimination Survey found that 40% of transgender people in this country are rejected by their families. And what I tell parents in the support groups that I do for PFLAG, I do one in Andover and one in Salem. Actually, the Salem one is really little, so if you know anyone that needs, needs help in the Salem area. But what I tell parents is we as parents have the biggest role in making sure that the fear that we have for the lives of our transgender children, that the things that we fear don't come true. if we support them and help them through their journey to a healthy adulthood, we are in the most strong position to prevent the outcomes that we hear about that are so awful, where they're in the sex trade industry, or they're homeless, or they've are involved in drugs, or they're suicidal. So there's a lot of hope in the message that I have for parents, and that's really one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I had to answer the question for myself, why was I crying all the time at the thought that my daughter wanted to be my son? And I'm not sure I even can still totally unpack that, but it was a deep, deep-seated feeling of sadness. And I loved having daughters. I had two. I came from a family of girls. I had sisters. My father had sisters. My mother had a sister. I knew girls. And as you heard from the introduction, I dedicated my life to women's health and women's issues, and I was a feminist from, college days. So having daughters was like phenomenal. And it wasn't really that I guess I was afraid of what I was going to lose in having a son and taking this precious little girl and imagining how she was going to change. So I'll be saying more about that. But the whole issue that parents, I think, face when they have a child that's transgender, there's so many things, so many emotions that come up. One is fear about their future. Are they going to be happy? Are they going to be healthy? Will they be accepted? Will they have love? But that sense of grief and loss, and it's kind of a hidden sense. I mean, there's not that many, if you have a child with a terminal illness, there's support groups, there's places, and at the time, 10 years ago now, there were no support groups for parents of transgender kids. We were just kind of struggling through. So before I do a little bit of reading, I want to make some, just do a little defining. Transgender refers to anyone that feels that their mind, the gender that they hold in their mind, is different than their anatomical gender. Cisgender people are people where there's a match between how you feel and your anatomy. And those of us where there's a match between our body and our mind, we have a lot of privilege. We go through the world not having to worry about what box to check. But if you actually have a form that asks you if you're male or female, and you have a female body but you feel male, you don't know which box to check, and you can be accused of being duplicitous in both cases. So there's landmines all along the way for kids that really don't feel that their gender fits. And I think for most of us, we take it so for granted that when somebody's pregnant, the first thing we ask is it a boy or girl? As if that's predictive for their entire life. And what we really ought to be saying to new parents is, your baby's anatomy is male, and your child will eventually tell you what their gender is. Wow. And it's pretty mind-boggling to think that the two aren't always aligned, but they're not always. And making room for those kids and adults where they're not aligned is a gracious, loving thing to do for people that struggle with that. So assigned gender is the gender that, when the nurse or the doctor looks at the baby and assigns the gender based on their external anatomy. And that's the assigned gender. The affirmed gender is the gender that a person feels in their heart. And those are often the same, but they're not always. So you might want to just go through the exercise of asking yourself, when did you know your gender? Most of us were told, you're a girl, you're a boy, and we took it at face value. And for most of us, that was fine, but not for all of us. So I'll be talking a little bit about affirmed gender and assigned gender. Gender identity and sexual orientation are two separate things. I made a lot of mistakes raising my child because I had the two of them sort of conflated. And the reason why it's important to separate them is because gender identity has to do with how you feel in your own body, who you present yourself in the world as. Sexual orientation is who you're attracted to. So when you have a gender nonconforming child, a lot of parents are kind of encouraged to think, oh, they'll be gay or lesbian when they grow up. So you allow yourself to think, oh, I don't have to worry about this until they're a teenager. But if it's gender identity, it really helps to start addressing that really early, when they're 2, 3, 4. Kids that are 2, 3, 4 years old know their gender. And you'll see as I start reading that I wasn't paying attention. I didn't know that at the time. And I think that it's almost like learning that the Earth that the sun does not revolve around the Earth. That's how dramatic these changes are for thinking about gender and anatomy, that the two aren't aligned because we're so used to them believing that they are. So it's really thanks to people who are transgender and gender nonconforming that we're learning this about the human mind. And by the way, we don't really know why that is. There's some theories, and I go into them in the book. I'm not going to go into them here because they're pretty involved, but trying to understand why that is, why some people develop along two separate pathways. It's sort of a mystery, but we know that it happens. It's part of the rainbow of nature. So gender expression is how we express our gender. It doesn't necessarily mean gender identity. You know, there are kids that want to be gender nonconforming, but they're certainly fine and happy with their bodies. But there's other kids that are very gender nonconforming because they're trying to, because internally they don't feel comfortable with their body. So for parents of gender nonconforming kids, it's really helpful to sort out what you're looking at. A gender nonconforming kid may not be transgender, may not be gay or lesbian, may just be gender nonconforming. And we're seeing a lot more of that in college age, in the younger generation.
What is the distinction between transgender and gender nonconforming?
Good question. The difference between a transgender person, gender nonconforming, transgender is sort of the umbrella term for anyone that doesn't feel congruent with their body and their mind. So, but a gender nonconforming person, and most transgender people want to sort of be the other gender. A gender nonconforming person is somebody that might not feel either gender fits or both genders fit. So you hear about people that are gender queer now, and they want to use a pronoun they. They don't want to use he or she because neither one of them suits them. And it's happening a lot in college campuses where a lot of young people are just saying, this whole gender thing just doesn't work for me. Some days I feel male, some days I feel female. I'm not going to necessarily change my body. I'm just not going to adhere to this box that people put us in because I'm a human being. So it's a new time for us around gender. And then transitioning is, transitioning it has a number of different meanings, but historically it sort of means when somebody's transitioning either through surgery or through some sort of a medical procedure from one gender to another. But with little kids, obviously you're not going to transition them with any kind of medical intervention. Little kids, like a 5-year-old that wants to, really doesn't fit their gender and feels very pained about that. A parent can socially transition them by helping them pick a gender-neutral name or a boy's name or a girl's name that's that fits them, and help them dress the way they feel, even though anatomically it doesn't match, and help them socially transition. And they can wait to do any of the medical options later. So those are just sort of the ground, it's like laying the groundwork for the topic for tonight. So my book is really about the journey that I traveled. I went through like 7 different stages as I delineate them in the book in terms of dealing with what I was seeing. And the first is just the whole idea of how we anticipate and get attached to the notion of this child that's coming into our life and all the ways in which we project based on the gender, of who this child's going to be. And, I was as guilty as anyone, probably more so, because thinking that I had a daughter, I assumed I'd have a daughter for my whole life. And it's not that I really wanted the fancy wedding and the grandchildren and the daughter that lives down the street that I did everything with. But I thought that I would have this camaraderie, this long-term relationship with a daughter, and really loved the idea of that. When I realized that my daughter right from the beginning was going to be so gender nonconforming in almost every way conceivable, it raised a lot of questions for me. So I'm going to read a little bit about how parents feel when this first occurs, or how I felt. Some parents don't feel like this, but I did. My first feelings about Kendra's gender nonconformity were embarrassment and dismay over how adamant and obstinate my child was and how powerless I was in my attempts to change that. There is a long tradition in the mental health field of blaming and diagnosing parents when boys act like girls and girls like boys. Traditional norms hold that mothers teach daughters how to dress, do their hair, and care for dolls, while fathers teach their sons how to throw a ball, ride a bike, and not to cry when they fall. When children refuse to learn gender-specific developmental milestones, it is we parents who are judged as failures. Parents of gender nonconforming children can become targets of attack from all sides. Professionals in medicine, education, social services, religion, the general public, and even members of our own families. Some question our motives for allowing nonconforming gender expression, others question our sanity, and all question our parenting. It's no surprise then that many of us feel ashamed about our inability to properly coach our child, thereby protecting them from a lifetime of ridicule. The parent with the same assigned gender may feel a particular burden. I think it's actually more true for people that have boys that want to dress like girls. You know, I was pretty okay with having a tomboy for a daughter. I actually liked it. I thought she was going to grow up to be this really strong feminist, and I read all into that, you know, and so I supported that. But yet there were times when, you know, I wanted her to get dressed up for a family photo or wear a dress that a relative had given us for a family gathering, and she wanted to wear a cat costume, and she wanted to growl at people. And when I look back on that now, I think that that was her way of being gender neutral. You know, when you see a cat or a dog, the first thing you identify is not their genitalia. You don't know if it's a male or female. And yet, you know, we dress children very clearly as masculine or feminine, and she was going to go under the radar that way. So, so I told myself, well, it's a phase, she'll outgrow this, you know, and for a lot of kids it is a phase. They say like about 25% of the time kids remain gender nonconforming and maybe consider transitioning. You know, if you have a gender nonconforming child, only about 25% of them remain that way up until adolescence. So I was banking on the fact, I didn't even know that number. I only learned that as I started delving into the research, but I was banking on the fact that, you know, she'd outgrow it. So this is my reaction to my wishful thinking was that this was a phase and she would outgrow it. It kept me always on the lookout for clues that the tide was about to turn. So in one instance, I took her to get her hair cut, and the woman that was cutting her hair was telling her things like, oh, do you have a boyfriend? And don't you want to look like a girl? Don't you want your hair curly? So she put it in these like ringlets. And I watched Kendra in this seat, and I'm thinking, I wonder if she's going to like look in the mirror and like how she looks, because this is a totally new experience. She was probably 8 at the time, and I had always been cutting her hair. So I'm having a pretty good feeling that she's hating this, but I'm not intervening, I'm waiting. When she got out to the car, she screamed, ranted, raved, jumped onto the floor of the car, and basically didn't want anyone to see her and was furious. So this is my reflection on what happened. So it kept me watchful for every opportunity to subtly expose her to more feminine ways of being. I was careful to keep those thoughts to myself lest she sense a lack of support, but I cannot deny my internal longing and my hidden agenda. This misplaced hope interfered with my ability to support and protect her in circumstances like this. It was 2 against 1 in that beauty parlor, and Kendra knew it. I might have stepped in, I might have checked with her to see if she wanted her hair styled, created an opening for her to say, no, that's not me. It would have signaled to her that it's okay to refuse, that I was on her side. Instead, I stood back and let a stranger try to mold this unique, self-defined child into our image of girlness. In the car, I saw how angry and alone, how violated Kendra felt by the expected rituals of feminine preening that loomed on her horizon. Of all the people in her life, she wanted me, her mother, to understand and defend her. But I crossed over and joined all the other voices urging her to stifle her true self and conform to gender norms. I tried to make amends. I assured her that we'd go right home and that she could jump into the shower and get her hair back to normal. I drove that 1.5 miles as fast as I could, trying to distance us from my own duplicity. But it was the first tiny fissure between us, and it was about to expand. So what I didn't know then also that I learned is that puberty for transgender children can be the beginning of a huge crisis. It can actually be, it can actually create post-traumatic stress. And I knew that, you know, puberty was going to be a hard time for Kendra, and I actually knew this way before we even approached it. And so I wrote her this poem probably when she was about 9 to help, in my own mind, to think about how is this girl that's so wild and carefree, still running topless on the beach, you know, what's it going to be like when puberty hits? And I'm thinking to myself things like, you know, body image, eating disorders, that kind of stuff, what girls go through. I'm not thinking she's going to be devastated because she wishes she was a boy. That never crossed my mind. So I'm going to read a little bit about what happened at this phase of her life. Long before puberty struck, I wrote a poem for her about the passage to womanhood. Even though I fully anticipated the crisis this would evoke for her, it never occurred to me that this was gender identity. By rooting the experiences in nature, I hoped it might lessen the blow, because she loved nature. She loved animals. She loved everything about nature. So I was, she and I longed for a magical world where time could stop so that she could remain her wonderfully wild, androgynous self. I feared the bondage that she would feel covering her free heart with clothing, and I hoped that by the time puberty hit, she would have outgrown her disdain for all things female. We stood on opposite sides of this shore, me beckoning to her to cross, waiting to enfold her in the protective circle of women with kindred spirits, Kendra balking, unable to cross, but knowing she couldn't stay where she was. I longed to coax her, hoping to make the passage palatable. I considered making a jacket to wrap her in love and affirmation with memories from her past, or to give her a book of her favorite poems and songs, along with her own writings and drawings. I wanted to weave carefree threads of childhood into her emerging, unhappier adolescence. Maybe a handheld mirror with leopard or tiger stripes to help her take in her own beauty, look into her own wildness, and love what she saw. I'd attended several coming-of-age celebrations with friends and actually did some of those with their daughters, and I dreamed of sharing a similar experience with Kendra in some quiet but meaningful mother-daughter way. But I slowly gave up my hope of any such ceremony. I was not prepared for how devastated and hopeless Kendra felt when puberty finally arrived. She would not ever celebrate the body that so misrepresented and betrayed her. But where exactly did that leave her? My own woman-affirming, girl-empowering stance, once a means of protection, now became a barricade between us, a symbol for each of our difference. Not yet in a land of her own, but decidedly unable to follow me, Kendra began to turn her back, refusing to speak, in silent retreat to find her own path. It was a painful, unexpected fork in our journey. So, yeah, Kendra went into a cave. She went into a deep depression, and I watched it, and I saw signs of it. She was online researching self-injury, researching, I'm not even, you know, I think at the time she had a MySpace where she was trying on a boy's name, or at least a gender-neutral name. But a lot of what was happening is she was just in her room, very withdrawn. And it was really hard to reach out and figure out what was happening. So I was looking for therapists and trying to get her to connect with therapists. And a lot of different opinions were raised. You know, we were looking at anxiety, we were looking at depression, we were looking at ADD, we were looking at a little bit of OCD, I mean, obsessive compulsive. I'm thinking we're dealing with an eating disorder. Suddenly I'm realizing she's wearing really baggy clothes. I'm not seeing her arms or legs. I'm thinking maybe it's an eating disorder, body image issues, you know, the stuff that girls go through. And then I realized that she's cutting and trying to figure out, you know, what's that about? So, but all this time I'm thinking I'm staying ahead of it, trying to find help, you know, we're gonna like get through this. But one day I was cleaning her room, and she was very messy. She had lots of pets, lots of different reptiles and turtles and geckos, and loved every kind of animal. But at this age, she was really focusing on geckos and turtles and lizards. And she had these beautiful ponds in her room with running water. And she spent all of her time in her room taking care of all these animals. But there were scraps of paper all around, writing and drawing and lots of creativity, unfinished projects. So I'm taking the sheets off her bed one day and I see this scrap of paper and I open it up and I read it. And it's a statement about how she wishes she was born a boy and she wishes no one ever knew her as a girl and that we would all forget that she was ever a girl. And that was like a knife in my heart when I saw that. And I saved that little piece of paper, but I've since lost it. I can't even quote what it said, but I just slumped down on the bed and sat there like in shock and wept, because really it was there in black and white. How could I ignore it at that point? And my husband actually had said one day when he was getting dressed for work, said, Kendra's dealing with gender. And the older she gets, the more uncomfortable she is with her gender. And so we were starting now to realize this, but Kendra really wasn't saying it. So I decided to try to see if we could get this conversation going. So I took a book out of the library called Love Makes a Family. And it was all these different vignettes of teenagers and families, some gay and lesbian parents, some transgender kids, some gay and lesbian kids. There were only 2 transgender people in the book. And actually I looked at the book and said, oh, there's trans people in there. I don't think I want to give her that book. I don't want to give her any ideas. That's still where I'm thinking. Like when my mother used to think if you didn't teach about sexual, activity, you wouldn't have sex. I'm thinking that. I won't give her this book. She'll think about that. So anyway, I gave her the book, against my better judgment, because I knew what she was going to pick. So she went upstairs to read the book, and she came downstairs and said, Mom, I never knew it. I'm a T. I never knew there was such a thing of the LGB. I'm T. So she finally had a name for what she was feeling. And I was like trying to be cool, like, oh, really? Oh. So, I wasn't surprised, and in a way I was a little relieved. She was thrilled, because now she knew that there were other people like her. There was actually a girl in the book with a necktie and a boy's haircut, and she saw herself in that book for the first time. She was about 16 at this point. So I'll never forget this. I picked up the phone, I went down into our backyard. We had this little shed in the backyard, and I called my lesbian friend, who I knew had said when she was the lesbian coming out, she wanted to be a boy too. So I'm thinking, this is just a phase. It's another phase lesbians go through. They want to be boys. I'm doing everything I can to make this go away. So I called my friend Shar, who helped me edit this book. She was in my circle, as was Joanna. As was Ellen, helping me put this all together into some semblance of order. And she said, well, you know what, I'll have her down to my place in Florida for a week, and she can meet all my lesbian friends, and we can talk about our coming out experiences and how, for some of us, we did want to be a boy, but we made peace with our bodies, because who knows, maybe that's an option. Maybe she just hasn't come across any lesbians in her world. So I did. I sent her down to my friend's house for a week, and we called it Lesbian Boot Camp. And Kai sat down with them and basically said at the end of the week, hey, thanks, guys. I had a great time. You took me parasailing, golfing, this, that, the other thing. But guess what? I'm not a lesbian. I'm not a girl. I'm a guy. I like girls, but I'm not a guy. I'm not a girl. So Shar called me up and kind of said, well, we tried. So it was becoming obvious that I was going to lose this daughter, much as I was trying to hold on to her. So I'm going to read you a little bit about how I was starting to deal with this. Denial is one way to interpret my inability to truly see this child, but retrospective longing might be more accurate. Watching my daughter split into 2, I desperately tried to keep both sides together. Every time I looked at the lonely, isolated, insecure teen, I saw the carefree wood nymph just beneath the surface. As her mother, I longed to mend the tear in the intricate and beautiful tapestry of her, to make her whole again. I struggled to prevent her from abandoning the qualities I loved for those I feared. I wanted to grasp my little girl and pull her out of the sullen teen and show her to Kendra, saying, look, this is who you are. This is who you've always been. Don't let this world crush you. Then this is how I've always known you, who I want you to stay. Please don't leave me. I've come to love you so. And even, I don't like who you're becoming as much as I liked you then. Where have you gone? And finally, I'll miss you so. Will I ever see you again? How can we open ourselves up to learning about the unique little beings that come into our lives as our children without making assumptions and projecting our hopes, biases, and fears onto their futures? Much of my blindness to who Kendra was becoming was due to the movie screen between us that continuously featured our shared past and the future I imagined based on what had gone before. I had taken aspects of who I knew her to be at 3, 5, 8, and 10 years old and woven them into a tapestry of her life based on that early partial knowledge. Her past and future were too deeply embedded in my mind. Her past and future were so deeply embedded in my mind, I considered the present a frightening interruption to be escaped and forgotten as quickly as possible. She may become my son, I thought, but in my heart, when I reminisced about her, she would always and forever be my daughter, no matter how she dressed today or in the future, or what name or pronoun she chose to use. I had a baby girl, and I loved, cherished, cuddled, rocked, and raised a baby girl, and she was beautiful in every way. My heart would always be attached to that little girl inside the grown son. Reconciling this duality was what my journey would require. I needed to understand the sorrow I felt about Kendra wanting to be a boy. What was it that was breaking my heart? So, what I was forgetting was Kendra's heart was also breaking. She was so unhappy as a girl. And she had to let me know by having an overdose. I mean, that's what it took. She overdosed on ibuprofen, and one day I was at a conference out of town. I was just in Worcester. I told her I could come home that night. She had come home from school, gone up to her room, and swallowed 100 ibuprofen. And Tony called me and told me to, come home. So there was a pounding in my ears in the room, and the room spun after I got the phone call. My knees buckled, and I heard myself scream, then sob. I hadn't unpacked, so I grabbed my bag and my books, and in the lobby I ran into a colleague and said I needed to leave, a family emergency. She walked me to the parking lot, but I couldn't find my car. Panic swept clean my mind, and all that had preceded that call was gone. I rushed from one end of the parking lot to the other like it was the first time that I had been there, as my friend tried to help me, calm me, and help me envision where I'd parked my car just a few hours before. The image of Kendra in a hospital emergency room grew larger by the minute, and all I wanted was to be by her side, but I could barely put one foot in front of the other, and I still had a long way to drive. I had about, an hour and a half. And that morning, as I was arriving at this conference, by the time I got to the meeting, my gas tank was about on empty, and I did something so out of the ordinary. I proactively filled the tank, as I told myself, I may need to leave in a hurry, and I won't want to stop for gas. It's unsettling how we can know things and yet still be surprised when they happen. My denial, my trust in who Kendra had been, resilient and strong, clouded my ability to see her current changed self, depressed and alone, desperate and alone. My whole body trembled as I absorbed the shock that Kendra had threatened her life. I would have been physically unable to pump gas in order to get to the emergency room. We were in treacherous, uncharted waters. Everything had changed, and I was flooded with regret. So, you think you're a good mom, and you think you're staying on top of it, and you know your kid's in crisis, and you're going to one therapist after another, and you're getting all this advice. And when I look back, and the way I wrote this book, I wrote a lot about my personal story, and then I did a lot of research. Each chapter has my personal story with my daughter, then a lot of research, and then looking back after I did the research in each chapter like, oh, look what I missed. So what I missed that's so important for parents of gender nonconforming or transgender children, when they disclose like that, when they come out, they're basically saying, okay, I've told you, now do something, I'm ready. And I missed it. I thought, oh, we can be androgynous. You can live in the middle for a while. I get that you want to be a boy, but maybe it's a phase. Maybe you can stay there for a while. And she was kind of saying, you know, help me. I'm in a lot of pain. I'm not comfortable as a girl. And I've told you, and let's get the show on the road here. This is really painful for me. And yet, you know, I think we were in this funny little dance too, because she kind of knew that I was very ambivalent, as all parents are with kids that may need some permanent, you know, surgery, hormones. It's a big deal to think you're going to do that when your child is still a minor. You don't want to take that on, because your worst fear is that, well, what if they change their mind? You know, kids at 16, 17, 15, whatever, we change our minds at 25. So for a parent to make that decision that could be so permanent, it's a big burden. So I think that we were in this dance of trying to understand what to do, and the best thing that we finally ultimately did was get Kendra in to see a gender therapist, you know, a gender specialist that really understood what Kendra was dealing with, and not the anxiety medication or the depression. I mean, those were symptoms, and obviously dealing with the symptoms were important to help her cope, but the real rooted, the issue really, the core issue was her gender dysphoria. So after that overdose, she went to McLean Hospital for a partial hospitalization. And let me just say, Kai is supportive of this book. I am not telling Kai's story without his permission. He's basically said, you know, people need to know about this, that my journey was sort of treacherous, and, you know, we could have, like, not made it. So some of his words are in the book, and he's read the book, and he proves it. Going to a mental hospital was the worst part. These are his words from his journal. Very few people are diagnosed as crazy in other people's eyes, and less are hospitalized because they simply can't deal with life those normal people set out as the playing rules. We had all been diagnosed, so he was in a group with other adolescents. We had all been diagnosed as crazy, just incompetent teens, by almost the rest of the world. And so seeing the world telling us what we should be, well, we naturally concluded that we were the wrong ones. We never thought to question the world. So ask me if I'm glad that it happened, and to be honest, I am. I still have my life, but I'm still very much in the process of helping other people struggling with the same things find a different overdose. Not one of medication, but perhaps the knowledge of who they are is who they are. That nothing, no one can change that or take it away from them. So for the first time, he met other people that had similar issues, but the whole time he was at McLean, they never dealt with gender identity. You know, they were still dealing with the symptoms of the anxiety. So the next phase for us was really looking at what the transition was going to be, because it was time now for him to transition. And it's, you know, hormones and surgery are really the permanent remedies for someone who's trans. And I was still dealing with, you know, the fact that my daughter was repudiating what I considered the mother-daughter relationship. And, you know, for those people, there's a few people in the room that know I did women's spirituality rituals, and Demeter and Persephone, that ritual, that whole myth of, you know, the reason we have winter is because a mother and daughter are separated. You know, Persephone is taken into the underworld, and Demeter is, you know, on the earth grieving. That's why it's cold now out here, and barren and snowy, and you know, that's a mother's grief when her daughter leaves. And yet my daughter was walking away and never coming back. Yet my daughter was repudiating that passionate, enduring bond between a mother and a daughter that can make life bloom for some. I had known that joy with my daughter. Whether because of how she came to me or what her little spirit awakened in me, it hardly mattered. All I knew is that I too was about to enter a barren, cold landscape of an interior winter whenever I thought of her leaving. She was about to disappear forever before my very eyes, and in order to save her soul, I had to be complicit. It felt like betrayal of her, of me, of our love, to stand by while she was taken apart bit by bit. Had my love been a fraud? I no longer seemed to know who she was. I couldn't make any sense of it. What did gender really matter anyway, and why was I so wrapped up in it? We were dealing with Kendra's life, not mine, and if this is what she needed to be happy and healthy, I would have to trust that. I would let go of her so he could emerge. So she started taking testosterone and her voice cracked. And that was the first, I think, hard evidence that I was going to lose her. Because I loved her voice, and as soon as I knew I was never going to hear her girl voice again, I started thinking of all the little ways she would sing in the car to all the songs, because I commuted a lot to work, and so she'd be in the car with me a lot to and from daycare. And she loved Raffi, and so now her voice is changing. The first harbinger, and Cher talks about this too, when her Chaz started testosterone, the voice. You lose the voice. The first harbinger of my daughter's physical disappearance was when Kendra's voice began to crack. I spiraled back into grief over the loss of her. I had loved her voice. As a child, Kendra loved to sing. Her favorite singer was Raffi. She knew many of his songs by heart. We listened to music whenever we were in the car, which was often, and she frequently sang along. She sat at the piano with songbooks and pretended to play while singing. But as she grew, her singing stopped. She hated the sound of his girl's voice, I later learned. I reasoned with myself that the girl I was missing was already grown and gone anyway, but replacing her felt different than losing her. For a time, I avoided speaking with him. He sounded like a stranger, a man I never knew rather than the daughter I'd known for 2 decades. So then, the change of pronouns is really hard too, because when you have a transgender family member, they want to pick a new name, change their pronouns, so you're introducing them as this is my daughter, and then pretty soon you're like, they're not quite your son yet. It just blows your mind to, switch. I mean, imagine, any of you that have kids, just imagine how that is. So for a while, I avoided introducing my kid to anyone because I couldn't bring myself to say, this is my son, and yet he did not look like my daughter. And Kai was passing as a boy, probably. I remember we would go to Trinidad, because my husband's from Trinidad, and we were going through the security line one day, and this guy's like, male or female? And I said, female, and he puts her in the male line anyway. So, and at that point, she was probably like 11. So that's how long she'd been wearing boys' clothes. Even though she had long hair, she just looked like a boy. So even when you told people she was a girl, they didn't believe you. So, so here's a poem that I wrote. I caused it, praying so hard for a girl after my mother died, and you, wanting to cheer me, showed up that way. You used to pray you'd become a cat. We'd paint your face, pin on a tail, you'd stalk and growl and lick. And then you started to cut. Like a snake, you'd outgrown your skin. And when God didn't answer your prayers, you birthed yourself a boy. So the next journey after testosterone and the name change and the pronoun change was surgery. And this was the one thing I'll never forget. One of the ways that Kai was supported during the last few years of high school, which were excruciating, was going to NAGLY, which is the North Shore Alliance for Gay and Lesbian Youth in Salem. And one day I was driving him there, and he just happened to say, would our insurance cover me having my breasts removed? And I'm like, no, definitely wouldn't cover that. Now they do. And I said, he still reminds me, why would you mutilate your body like that? Which is a terrible thing to say to someone who's transgender, because their body so misrepresents them, that their body is what's causing them pain. So it just means that I didn't get it, So at that point, you know, I didn't. I couldn't bring myself. I never thought I could bring myself to support my daughter through top surgery, but I did it. We started searching for surgeons when he was in college, and the first surgeon that we went to was, you know, showed us pictures of the surgery that she did, and they were horrifying. I thought they were big scars underneath, and you know, those pictures that she had were like pretty soon after surgery, so looked like you'd have really big scars, and you know, he was pretty freaked out by that. And I think it was at that point that I realized, after that visit with the surgeon, the level of pain and the physical process of surgery was so frightening to think of, that I couldn't sleep that whole night, and I called him the next day to see how he was doing. It just so hit me. You know, I've been caught up in my own pain. This is really about his pain. That's when I turned the corner and said, you know what, get over your stuff. Look what your kid's willing to do, because he's so unhappy in his body. This is so huge. It's a double mastectomy. Like, this is a big deal. So I got on board, and we found a surgeon, and he had the surgery in 2010 in New York City. And it was, you know, a very intimate time between the two of us. We talked a lot going down and how we never felt like a girl. And, you know, prior to that, we'd gone to a therapist who kind of helped us look at this chart that she'd put up, a timeline on the wall of all the moments when he knew that he, you know, really was born with the wrong body. So that was very helpful for family, you know, for us as a couple to realize that this wasn't a fad, it wasn't a phase, it wasn't something he was going to outgrow. This was real, that, you know, and it was permanent. So eventually he had surgery, and I was there with him. So I was proud that I was able to get there. So I'm just going to wrap up with a few reflections. Home, childhood, belonging, memories, coming of age. Every aspect of a person's life is influenced by the body they are born with and how that carries them during their journey in this life. Mind and body, along with the spirit that ignites and inspires them, are what we are given. Like a book's cover, our packaging defines us. People make assumptions based on gender, skin color, hair color, height, weight, beauty, build, ability, nationality, age, and so on. And the assumptions of others have an impact on us, particularly when we are young and just learning about our place in the world. And without a welcome, a place in society, we are adrift. Most of us don't worry about being singled out and humiliated in a public restroom. We can share childhood memories without having to disguise the gender we were living as, and hide or destroy childhood pictures to protect our own safety. Few of us have to avoid beaches and swimming in the sweltering heat because our bathing suit would be considered socially inappropriate. We don't worry which of two gender boxes to check. Few of us worry about ridicule when disrobed in a healthcare visit. Most of us don't wonder how someone we're dating feels about transgender people and when to share our gender history. No wonder transgender children and teens are susceptible to anxiety and depression. Every social interaction is fraught with landmines. And what really is gender anyway, other than a complicated and nuanced set of rules for sorting, valuing, and separating people? Few cultures or successive generations agree on what constitutes masculine and feminine, and yet gender remains one of the most defining and confining aspects of a person. Much of what people assume about someone is framed by their gender, and since gender is seen as synonymous with anatomical sex, we make assumptions before a child is even born. Transgender people are the world travelers of gender. They have been on the frontiers of gender and offer a wealth of knowledge as a result. They are the only ones who know firsthand the difference between how one feels and is treated as first a man and then a woman, or a woman and then a man. They have had to unlearn and then learn whole new ways of moving, speaking, dressing, taking or giving up space, expressing or hiding feelings. They have experienced both sides of the gender binary world that we have created over millennia, and they can make informed comparisons. Others who try only fabricate and presume. Transgender people have seen and walked both coastlines after traveling across the Great Divide. The mere fact that this can be done, and has been done by so many, is evidence that the divide is not as great as we have been led to believe. Trans people are bilingual in gender, bigender, able to bridge one of humanity's greatest rifts at a time when we need expanded awareness, understanding, and compassion. They have walked in another's shoes and have rare and valuable knowledge as a result. We would do well to listen and learn.